let our circumstances shape the way we view our God. We must let our God shape the way we view our circumstances.
You see, there are things in life that are unavoidable, unpredictable, and uncomfortable that come into our lives that are totally outside
Knowing
of our
about Jesus, being able to articulate the stories, being able to recount the gospel, being able to know some Bible verses is not the same thing as surrendering the control of your life to the lordship of Jesus Christ. It all joy.
The faith that you have, that's what's going to define you.
You ever felt like things are just falling apart in life? Like, I find, and I think most people would, when something bad happens, it's usually followed by a series of bad things that happen after. Like what the classic saying, when it rains, it pours. And I experienced this pretty strongly recently when me and my staff were on a trip for a conference and had to fly back. We're flying back, we had a layover in one city, and it wasn't a great layover. You know those like 5 or 6 hour layovers? Like it's not that long that you can really feel like you can really complain, but it's still long enough that you are in pain for a good chunk of the time. You're just like, what do I do? It's not long enough to go out and see the city that you're in or to explore, just long enough to suck. Those are the worst. And we had one of those. But on the way to the first stop, about halfway through, me and Pastor Abby were sitting in the aisle, and we had Pastor Ruben, I think, just behind us there. And all of a sudden, I'm talking, and it felt like I was being attacked by a million, just hammers in my head at once. And the pressure on the plane had just turned on me. And I know you're supposed to have gum. I had gum. You're supposed to yawn. You're supposed to whatever to make sure that your ears don't explode. My head just exploded. Like, it was top 3 pain I've ever had in my life. And if I wasn't an adult man on an airplane, which there's already a little bit of sensitivity about behavior on airplanes, I would have screamed at the top of my lungs. So I'm just just trying to hold it together. Turns out later on, I found out I blew out my eardrum, which is the worst pain, awful. But that's not the worst part of that trip, because we landed and we had this 5-6 hour delay, and we're like, okay, that's not that bad. We're gonna eat some food, just hang out, whatever. Like, we'll make it, we'll survive, it's doable. But then it comes, we're supposed to take off at 12:45, and then at 12:25, we're supposed to be boarding, and all of a sudden, the departure time on our gate changes to 6 p.m. Why? Why did it do that? That's not how flights work. That's not how numbers should work. It should be the same. We should get on the plane and we should take off, and I should go home with half of a working head. But no, they had forgotten to let us know or email us that morning that they had changed the flight time. So our 5-hour flight delay, 6-hour delay, turned into a 12-hour delay. And that was, ladies and gentlemen, the worst day of my life. I was losing my mind, and it just feels like it wouldn't have been that bad if I would have had to land and just say, well, we got 10, 12 hours here. But the fact that we walked right up to freedom, walked right up to it, and they're like, nah, not gonna happen. You have to sit in the airport longer. I hate airports. I hate them. They're the worst. Flying is bad enough, but airports are the worst. And it just felt like it was just spiraling every step of the way, just get a little bit worse, a little bit worse. I'm like, honestly, the plane's probably gonna crash now. That's the only next step that's logical. I thought we were gonna get delayed, thought we were gonna get stuck on the runway for 5 or 6 hours. Something crazy was gonna happen, but I am happy to report, as you can see, I did make it home, and my ear does work now. But when it rains, it pours. It feels like things can just continue to spiral. When one bad thing happens, it can feel like we get trapped into this state of just hopelessness. Have you ever been there before? Where it feels like the world is against you, or just like bad luck is around every single corner. Nothing seems to be getting better. And just when you think it is, all of a sudden it's like you have the rug pulled out from under you, because life just keeps hitting you over and over and over again. Everything that can go wrong is going wrong. One thing after another. When you fail that class, when you get dumped, when that crush won't go out with you, when your parents get divorced, when that loved one gets sick or you get that diagnosis, when your anxiety and your depression and the problems in your life just seem to be winning every time you turn around. Have you ever felt like that? How do you respond when it feels like life is falling apart? Like you're in an extended season of suffering and pain and anxiety or depression, and it feels like you can't win. When hopelessness reigns, how do you respond? Well, take a look. We're going to finish our series in James 5. We're looking at this last chapter. We've been going through this, and if you haven't been with us, I encourage you to check out the prior messages on our podcast or on YouTube. James is a book full of wisdom and so many different topics that are very different from each other, but just full of applicable wisdom for your life. So take a look through that as well. And so I want to take a look at chapter 5, and we're starting in verse 7. And James says, "Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of mercy and compassion." So he's talking here like in a season of garbage, when it feels like the world is falling apart. What am I supposed to do? He says, don't grumble, don't complain, okay, in the face of suffering, but count yourself as blessed. What? When everything sucks, when my life is falling apart, when something bad is happening to me, or a series of bad things are happening to me, James is saying, count yourself as blessed. Don't complain. Just don't worry, be happy. You know, when I'm in those seasons, if James were to be just in front of me and say that to me, I might slap him. I'd be upset. James, what are you talking about? What is wrong with you? Like, what is he thinking? Has this guy ever had a bad day before? He must just always be prancing through life, happy and full. It's always good for James, no problem. Clearly he's never experienced pain. Clearly he's never experienced any of the things that I've been through or you've been through, because normal people have bad days. Some more than others, but everyone has a bad day. And I don't know about you, but my natural response is actually usually to complain. I want to tell someone about it. I want to get mad. I want to address the problem. I want to fight the problem. But he doesn't say to do that. He says to count yourself as blessed. None of this makes sense. Nobody should be expected to do that. But we all would have the perspective, if we see other people behaving in that way in the face of trials and struggles, we would see that as honorable. Would you agree? If we see somebody who's going through something really bad or a sickness or something in their family, and they kind of take that really, really positive approach to everything, they don't fall apart, we think like, oh yeah, that's great, like that's virtuous. We think that's the type of person. I don't know if I could be like that person. I don't know if I could do that myself, but I sure wish I could. I would sure like to hope I can. We respect that person who has those traits in the face of suffering. But it's not just that random friend or that person you heard about who's called to respond to seasons of extended suffering or seasons of pain or trials like that. It's actually all of us who subscribe to a Jesus-based life. We're all called to that, and it's so contrary to our natural state. And so, my question is, how do we find this hope and patience in suffering? Because suffering is not something where we naturally find ourselves calm, where we find ourselves just with any sort of perspective, with any sort of hope in our life. So how do you find that? How do you find that place where you can make the decision to not complain, to not grumble, to not turn on your friends and fight with people, to not take the negative route, but to actually have positive outcomes? How do you find hope in a season of hopelessness? I want to look at this verse in James, and there's going to be a couple of different things. I want to give you 3 things that you can do to find hope in a season of extended hopelessness. And the first one is this. It's to keep perspective. One of the first things that happens when we fall apart, when life starts falling apart, is we actually stop believing in anything. We don't trust anything. We get mad at everything. We just have it's like everything's falling apart. It's like the mountains around us are crumbling. The buildings around us are falling down. And we don't have time to actually think about the reality in front of us. It feels like we're just dodging boulders and we're dodging debris at all times. And because of that, we just get into this fight or flight parasympathetic nervous system situation where we're just trying to stay alive. And we're, like I said, we're just day by day, moment by moment, trying to make it through. And it feels like we have no perspective because we don't. Because all of our focus is into the thing that's right in front of us, is into the scenario that's right in front of us, is into the long, drawn-out, never-ending series of problems that we are facing. The suffering is all that we can focus on, and we're just trying to survive it. But perspective is important. And James references that here when he says that just like farmers wait for something, as they wait for something important for that harvest, we are called to wait as well. He's bringing attention to another scenario where it may not be the same as whatever you're walking through and have walked through, but where it can be a long time. It can be tedious. It can be frustrating. There's no guarantees in it. I'm not much of a farmer. In fact, I can pick things up and put them down, but you don't want me anywhere near heavy equipment. It's just not going to go well. But I know that farmers, and I've known enough farmers where it is tedious and it is hard work. And basically, you start in the spring, and it's not until October or September that you actually get to see something from it. And if you didn't know, if you had never seen a farm work before or seen a plant grow from a seed, at some point around July and August, I'm probably going to be like, yeah, it ain't doing anything. This isn't going to lead to anything. This isn't working. It's not, how are we going to make money off of this? And you wouldn't have the perspective to understand that it's actually going to turn out, that this is a part of the process. To recognize that to get to a season of harvest, you have to go through a season of planting and a season of growing. And growing isn't always easy. Growing, consequently, often has pain associated with it. But the truth is that the worst thing we can do is get so caught up in our circumstances and the situation that's right in front of us that we don't think straight. And if I can encourage you in one thing, that if you are facing something right now in your life, or if you've been facing something and it feels like you're just trying to get by, like you feel like it's going to take you down, you feel like the situation is going to take you down, I encourage you to look for the perspective. I often try to look, what's the worst case scenario? Okay, that sucks. Am I dead? No. And work your way back from there. What is the good that you can find? What is the potential here? What really is the problem? How bad is this actually? How can I mitigate the problem? How can I make this better? How can I use this? Work back from the worst thing. Find whatever is causing your anxiety, whatever is causing your pain. Talk to God about it and work your way back and find that place of, I can do this. Because the thing that you're facing, the mountain in front of you, that you think you can't scale, that you think you could never, ever beat, it's beatable. It's not easy. But you have to find that, and the first way to find that is by finding perspective. The second way is this, and this one's a tough one, because we're kind of inherently selfish. I know I am. And we don't want to have to go through hard times, and we certainly want them to benefit us if we do. Well, I want to be stronger at the end of this. I want to be better at the end of this. And that's very realistic, and that's very possible. But one of the things that will come from it, one of the things that is important to find, is that good will come from your bad, if you allow it to. There is no season of pain, and there's no lesson learned that we can't be used by God later on for. It's not necessarily easy. That's not something that people are like, yes, sign me up. I want to go through hardship. I want to suffer because I want to help somebody else down the road. I want to gain all this perspective so that I can just help other people. Most of it, it's like, no, I just want to survive this situation. I want to just be alive. I want the pain to stop. I want to not have to go through this anymore. But there is truth in this. And in some situations where it's just bad, because there are situations that are just bad. There is a really hard time. You'll have a hard time if somebody, yourself or a family member, is diagnosed with terminal cancer. I understand that. If you have to go through any sense of abuse or betrayal or some of these things that are just really, really hard, that there is no inherent good. It is a bad situation. But through it, if we keep perspective, if we chase after Jesus through it, if we do the right things and we come out the other side, however that looks, God will take the chaos in our life. God will take the pain that we've gone through, and he will use us and use our experience and use the wisdom that we gain through him, not through gritting our teeth and forcing ourselves through the situation, but the wisdom that he will teach us and allow us to be used by him to change the world around us. Take a smaller scale one. If I remember the first time I ever dated somebody, I got dumped pretty hard. And I think we've all been there at some point. And I remember just an older friend who had been through a couple of relationships. He was married. And he just pulled me aside. He said, you know, Jeff, the first one is the hardest, the most painful, because you've never experienced it before. But I promise you're gonna be okay. You're gonna move on. I've been there. I've been in pain. I felt that before. And that's a pretty small scale example, but because of the pain he went through, and it was hard for him, 5, 6, 7 years before that, he gained perspective and wisdom that he was able to then pass on to me. And it didn't solve my problems, but it helped me to find the perspective that I needed to make it through that season. Whatever the hardest thing that you've walked through is, or the thing that you're walking through right now, if you allow God, if you seek God, if you seek the way that Jesus has called us to live through that season, you have the opportunity to change the world around you. You may not be able to solve the problem, but you can take that negative in your life and you can turn it into a net positive through Jesus. You will be the blessing to other people down the road. We are counted as blessed because we are given an opportunity to use our suffering to grow in our faith, number one, to get closer to God. But the pain we walk through, it can be used to help others. And if you get the perspective right, if you start to really think about that, that is not just like a supplementary thing that we get. Yeah, okay, well, I guess if I have to go through that, I guess I could help somebody maybe. What a blessing and what an opportunity we have to experience pain, to experience something that just sucks, and then to be able to use that to help somebody to not have to go through what you've been through, to not have to hurt to the same degree, to be able to use your story, to use your pain, to be able to pacify and bring peace to the chaos of other people. That's not just, well, I guess so. That is a gift that we get to be a part of. Healing other people, helping other people to not make the same mistakes that you may have. I see that as a gift, and I think it's time for us to look at the opportunity in our suffering, not just to look at the suffering that sits in front of us or stands in our way. Every single time you struggle, every single time you are put through something, to whatever degree that is, there is an opportunity to not just help other people, but to magnify and glorify what God can do in our lives through that. It's an opportunity for God to work through your life and to work on other people as well. So if you're walking through something today, you have an opportunity, but you have to get the right steps to get there. You can't just fall apart. You can't just go totally selfish. When we seek Jesus in our suffering, when we find that peace, that hope, that's how we are not just going to survive, but we'll actually find an opportunity to change the world around us as well. No pain you experience can't be used by God to bring hope to other people. The next line that really gets me in this verse is he talks about in prayer. If we look at the next kind of section in chapter 13, it says, is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. So what do we do? What's the third thing that we do when we're facing trauma, suffering, trials? We can get perspective. That's important. To kind of muster up a little bit of like, okay, what's actually happening here? We can do a cognitive exercise like I talked about. Like, okay, let's just find within rational thought and logic what is happening. How can I control it? How can I frame this? How can I fix this? How can I find the best outcome? And we can also get hope in the thought that I could actually be used by this and it could be helpful down the road. But if there's one thing that I can encourage you with that James is talking about here that is just an essential biblical truth that will change your life as you go through hard times is this. And it sounds simple, and it is simple, but it is so complex and so hard to actually do, especially when you're looking down the barrel of something that is really, really difficult. And that is to simply seek after God. Seek Jesus with everything in you. Magnify him in your life, reflect his character, find out who he is, go to scripture and figure out what are you called to live, not just in a season of pain and suffering and chaos or whatever it is that you're facing, but to go to the other side of that and say, who am I called to be at all times? What are the character traits of Jesus that I'm supposed to exemplify in my day-to-day life, in everything that I do? Who am I supposed to be? And then be that person. But it starts with truly seeking Jesus, not just seeking the solution for my life, not just seeking something to pacify the pain I'm going through, the difficult season that I'm in, but to actually reflect Jesus. And then through that heart change, through that life change, through that perspective, bringing world-altering spiritual connection with the God that created the universe, with Jesus who died on the cross for you, for your sins. And because of his death on the cross and rising again a couple days later, we actually can be connected to God, and we don't have to fear anything in our life because we don't have to fear death because Jesus defeated death. And anything else isn't scary by comparison because Jesus has the keys to death and Jesus is close to you. And he invites all of us into that. So number one, and it sounds simple, but it says, is anyone among you in trouble? Pray. Are you falling apart? Pray. Is your life in peril? Pray. Are you failing school? Pray. Is your relationship falling apart? Pray. Are you feeling sick and you have a diagnosis of something? Pray. If you're fearful that you're sick, pray. If something is happening in your life where you feel like it's going out of control, where you're scared, where you have anxiety, your depression is out of control, pray. I can't promise you that it is going to solve everything in the moment. It might. God can do anything. But it does say in these verses as well that the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. And that does not mean that God is our genie. He's an Uber Eats. Skip the dishes. Just, hey, I'll order this prayer. Help me out. Do this. That's not what this is saying. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. God's will happen no matter what. He's sovereign in that way. But there is something that I cannot explain to you that happens, and we see this in Scripture, and we can see this anecdotally. I've seen this in my life. I've seen this across the board in other people's lives. There's something that changes when we pray. Somehow within God's will, which is always going to be achieved, we get to play a role in how that comes about. God allows us to play a role in his larger story. And so it is absolutely in all seasons, but especially if you feel like things are falling apart or you're scared or freaked out, to pray, to seek God, to ask for help, to knock on the door, and hopefully, he'll answer. And you know he will answer. He will hear you. It may not end the way. You may say, God, please take this from me. And the next day, your situation may still be there. You may still be suffering. You may still be sick. You may still be injured. The problem may still be there. But I promise that if you keep seeking after God, eventually he will answer. It might not be in the way that you want it to be, not the way you would have it tailor-made to solve the problem, but I promise that in the large scheme of things, where God sits far back from the timeline, he can see everything, not just what you're going through and what is best for you now, but what is best for you and the entire world on the timeline further along as well. And he will bring you to that best outcome. But we need to seek him and pray. Because how do you get perspective? You find the heart of God. You find his perspective, his vantage point. And it's only through that you'll be able to find the perspective you need and the wisdom you need and the humility you need that you can't have on your own to help other people and to be able to walk through the situation that you're living out. There's a story in the Bible, in Mark, one of the Gospels, the first couple chapters, first couple books of the New Testament, second half, Jesus' life begins, and then it's the New Testament, and there's 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and these are first-hand accounts of people who lived and watched Jesus, and they are chronicling these things and sharing their perspectives. And in Mark 24:35, says, "That day when evening came, he said to Jesus, to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall or storm came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' They were terrified and asked each other, 'Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.' Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" They had just seen Jesus do so many miracles. They've been following him around, and they've been seeing him basically control nature and do things that only God can do. I feel like from my perspective, we should see this and think these guys are absolute morons. Like, they were with Jesus. Did you really think he's just going to let everybody drown? He's never failed before, so why would I be scared now? It's a boat. I've never been in a storm like that, and it's, they had never been in that situation, so maybe they'd be a little scared. But Jesus is on the boat. Like, what are you worried about? But I know in my life, God has come through for me time and time and time again. It doesn't mean that it's always been easy. It doesn't mean that it's been fun. Sometimes it was just straight up agonizingly, torturously painful. But every single time I've had anxiety or freaked out or thought the world was going to end or my world was going to end, I looked back 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, and I think to myself, I didn't need to be so stressed. God was always in control, and the way it turned out, it wasn't what I was praying for, it wasn't the way I would have tailor-made it, but on the other side, I can see what God did, and it was actually better than anything that I could have ever imagined. His will is better than my will every single time. And so I've learned, and I'm learning, and I'm trying to continually pray, God, your will, not mine. And that's hard, because we have to let go. We have to admit that we're not in control, and we can't be in control, and it's a bad idea if we are actually in control. And I'm not just saying don't care about your life, don't try to do your best, but I'm saying that God is in control. And we don't need to be afraid, because even though I look at the disciples as really stupid in this verse, in this story, because Jesus was on the boat, there's so many times in our lives, I know in my life, where it just feels like, Jesus, why are you sleeping on me? Why don't you care? Why are you asleep in the boat? Don't you care that we're going to die? Don't you care that my life is falling apart? If you're walking through something and you feel like there's no hope, and you feel like God's abandoned you, maybe you've never told anybody, but it feels that way. Maybe you're saying all the right things, maybe you're doing all the right things, but you feel hopeless. It feels like God just isn't there. You start to question, is he there? Is he real? Did I imagine all of it? Is it even possible? How could a loving God allow me to go through this? How could a loving God allow me to be born this way, to feel this way, to have this thing happening in my life? If he is real, he's asleep and he doesn't care. He doesn't care. Because how could I go through this? How could I ask for this to go away? How could I ask for the solution to this? How could I do everything that seems to be right? I show up to church, I pray, I read my Bible, I'm in a small group, all these different things, but yet it just seems like everything's falling apart. If you're there, I want you to know this. It may feel like Jesus is asleep on the boat. It may feel like your life is going to be destroyed, like God doesn't care, but you need to know this more than anything, is that Jesus is still on your boat. The God who controls the universe, the God who calms the storm, who tells the sea to stop and the winds to cease with just his voice, with just what he says. He's on your boat. He's in your life. And if you have him in your life, if you've accepted Jesus, you have that at all times. And even though within the larger timeline and storyline of our lives, it feels like because nothing is happening here, that everything is falling apart and that God doesn't exist here. But God actually exists everywhere, calling us to the best outcome. And sometimes I think, and sometimes I lose perspective and think that God is just like, kind of like, yeah, listen, like here, go towards that when he calls me to something. I have a generally good idea. Yeah, no, that's the way to go. That's it, I think. God isn't making his best hypothesis, estimated guess. God is standing there outside of space and time at your best outcome. And he's saying, I'm already here. I'm calling you to this. Don't go any other direction, 100%. This is where you need to come. This is where you need to be. Please don't turn back. Don't hesitate. Don't stop, because there is peace and there is hope and there is a future for you that is good on the other side of this. He's not asleep. He hasn't given you over to the sea that threatens to swallow you up. Friends, listen, Jesus is right there. And maybe you've never acknowledged him before. Maybe you've never known him. Maybe you've never made that decision. Or maybe you have for a long time. You've run away and something happened and you feel like he was asleep and he gave up on you, so you kind of rebel. But in the back of your mind, you know he's still God. And maybe right now you're walking through something. You followed him for a long time, but you just can't comprehend how God could love you, how the same God that you experienced when you were a teenager or a kid could allow you to be in the circumstances and the situation that you're in right now. And I need you to know is that Jesus will never abandon you. Jesus has never abandoned you. If there's one thing you can hold firm to in your life, if every person, if everything turns on you, is that God, that Jesus will never abandon you. He always cares. He's not asleep. He's fully aware. And he's on the other side of your circumstances, calling you to his best outcome, the one that you could never find by yourself, the one where on the other side, you not only gain the perspective of what was actually happening, but you can also use the story and everything you've gone through for positive and to help people, and even in your own life to avoid that problem or to navigate similar problems down the road. There is hope when we recognize that Jesus is in control and that we need to stop holding so tight to it. And so for you tonight, if you're that person, and I think we all probably have something that's been keeping us up or stressing us out or giving us anxiety, the way to gain peace on something that we're carrying or something that we're holding that is hurting us, whether that's unforgiveness or a situation or circumstances we're walking in, is not to white knuckle it, not to squeeze harder and hold it tighter, but to actually release, to let it go. It may not solve the problem, but to stop holding it and trying to fix it and trying to manipulate it, but to say, God, you can have it. You're in control. You're God, I'm not. And I trust you. I know that no matter what storm I'm in, you've got me. And I can trust you because you love me. So tonight, I'm sure there's 1,000 things going on in people's lives. Very different from each other. No matter what you're walking through in this space, it's very real. And I want you to know that God wants to help you, that Jesus wants to calm the storm in your life, that Jesus wants to engage and bring that peace, and to show you that even though you're walking through something right now, even though it's hard, you should count yourself as blessed, because at the other end of this, Jesus is offering to do an incredible work in your life. And you will be better off in the end. If you can't see that now, you will eventually, if you allow Jesus to work through you. So the band's gonna play. We're going to have a prayer team coming up to the front. If you need prayer, if you're walking through something, you need someone to pray for you, to agree with you. If you need a miracle in your life, if you're sick or someone in your life is sick, we want to pray for you, and we want to just agree that God's going to work in your life. So they're going to be up here at the front, and as you guys stand, if you're able, and we just sing these songs, I encourage you to just seek after God, to give whatever you're struggling with, to just acknowledge, even though there may be a storm in your life around, that Jesus is on the boat, and acknowledge that you're the safest place that you could ever be, because he is right there beside you.